Chapter 1. The Illusion That Is Exhausting You. What if the biggest source of your anxiety isn't your job, your relationships, or your future? What if it's the silent belief that you're supposed to control all of it? Right now, as you're listening to this, your mind is managing conversations that haven't happened yet. It's rehearsing outcomes, predicting reactions, adjusting scenarios, preparing defenses, running simulations. And you didn't consciously ask it to. That invisible activity feels responsible, it feels intelligent, it feels like preparation. But it is quietly exhausting you. Most people believe anxiety comes from circumstances, from uncertainty, from pressure. But there's something deeper happening beneath all of that, a psychological habit so common that we mistake it for normal functioning. It's the addiction to control. Not control in the loud, obvious sense, not dominance, not manipulation. Control in the subtle sense. The attempt to manage how things turn out, to predict how others will behave, to secure outcomes before they unfold, to mentally grip situations that haven't even formed yet. And here's the paradox. The more you try to control what isn't yours to control, the more unstable your inner world becomes. This is not a motivational statement, it is a cognitive reality. Research in cognitive behavioral psychology consistently shows that anxiety increases when perceived responsibility exceeds actual control. When your brain believes you are accountable for outcomes you cannot fully influence, it activates threat detection systems. Your nervous system responds as if something is wrong, even when nothing is happening. That's the illusion. Your mind equates uncertainty with danger. But uncertainty is not danger, it is simply the absence of prediction. There is a difference. Most people never question this internal mechanism. They assume their worry is productive. They tell themselves, if I think it through enough, I'll prevent it, or if I prepare for every possibility, I'll feel safer. But notice something. Has that ever truly brought peace, or has it only brought temporary relief followed by another wave of something else to manage? Anxiety feeds on the belief that peace is located in the future, in the moment when everything is handled. But that moment never fully arrives. Because once one situation stabilizes, another appears. Once one outcome is secured, another variable enters the equation. The mind says, just one more thing to manage, and the cycle continues. Imagine carrying a backpack that refills itself every morning. You empty it before bed, you organize it carefully, you remove what you can, and when you wake up, it's full again. That's what unmanaged control feels like. The exhausting part isn't life itself, it's the constant mental negotiation with life. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Daniel. Daniel is competent, responsible, thoughtful. By every external measure, he is functioning well, but internally, he is always on. When his boss sends a short email, he analyzes tone. When his partner is quiet, he anticipates conflict. When a project is due next month, he begins mentally defending against failure today. Nothing catastrophic is happening, yet his body behaves as if something is always about to. Daniel believes this vigilance is maturity. He calls it preparation. He prides himself on being proactive. But when we looked closer, something became clear. He wasn't preparing. He was attempting to pre-control emotional discomfort. He believed that if he could anticipate every reaction, every possibility, every flaw, he could avoid feeling uncertainty. And that belief is what was draining him.
Here is something important. The mind confuses control with safety. But psychological safety does not come from controlling outcomes. It comes from regulating your response to them. That is a fundamental shift. Control says, I must shape reality. Calm says, I will shape my response. You may not even realize how often your mind is trying to shape reality. When you replay conversations, when you imagine worst-case scenarios, when you mentally rewrite what you should have said, when you try to decode someone's mood before they speak, it feels small, but multiplied across hours, days, years, it becomes chronic tension. Stanford research on stress perception has shown that the belief that stress is harmful amplifies its physiological impact. In the same way, the belief that uncertainty must be managed amplifies anxiety. Belief drives biology. If you believe you are responsible for everything turning out correctly, your nervous system will stay alert indefinitely. And constant alertness feels like exhaustion. There's another layer. The illusion of control gives the ego a role. It says, if I think enough, I matter more. If I manage enough, I prevent loss. If I anticipate enough, I stay ahead. But notice how heavy that role is. It positions you as the emotional manager of the universe. No wonder you're tired. Now here's the shift that begins the quiet mind. What if your job is not to control outcomes, but to participate in them? What if your responsibility ends at effort, not at result? There is a mental model we'll explore later called the mental courtroom method. It exposes distorted thinking patterns and cross-examines them. But for now, just notice this. When you assume responsibility for outcomes you do not fully control, your thoughts begin presenting catastrophic evidence as if it were fact. What if this goes wrong? What if they misunderstand me? What if I fail? The mind argues these cases aggressively, but it never shows you the full data. It never says, what if this goes right? It never presents the evidence of resilience you've already demonstrated. It only prosecutes, and you accept the role of defendant. That is exhausting. There is an invisible labor happening inside you, constant forecasting, constant adjusting, constant bracing. And bracing is the body's language for anticipated impact. But most of the impacts never arrive. You brace for conversations that go smoothly. You brace for rejection that never happens. You brace for mistakes that become minor inconveniences, and yet your body pays the price as if they were real. Here is something most people never consider. Trying to control everything is a way of trying to avoid feeling vulnerable. If you can manage the outcome, you don't have to sit in uncertainty. If you can predict the reaction, you don't have to risk discomfort. If you can prepare perfectly, you don't have to feel exposed. But vulnerability is not weakness. It is the admission that you cannot pre-write reality, and accepting that truth is strangely liberating. A quiet mind does not come from eliminating uncertainty. It comes from accepting the limits of your influence. There is power in recognizing the boundary between effort and outcome. You control your preparation. You control your integrity. You control your actions. You do not control timing. You do not control other people's emotions. You do not control every variable. And the moment you stop trying to manage what isn't yours, your nervous system begins to soften. Not instantly, but gradually. Think about how much mental energy is spent trying to anticipate other people's reactions. What if they don't like it? What if they judge me? What if they leave? Each what if assumes ownership of someone else's decision.
But their reaction belongs to them, not to you. This does not mean detachment. It means clarity. Clarity reduces unnecessary responsibility. And unnecessary responsibility is one of the greatest sources of anxiety. By the end of this audiobook, your relationship with your mind will change. Not because you will eliminate uncertainty, but because you will understand what is actually yours to hold, and what was never yours to carry. Right now, just notice something simple. Take one current worry. Ask yourself quietly, is this fully within my control? Or am I trying to manage an outcome? That distinction is the doorway. Behind it is relief. Not passive resignation, not apathy. Relief through alignment. Daniel didn't quit his job. He didn't change his relationship. He didn't restructure his life. He changed one belief. He stopped assuming responsibility for reactions he could not dictate. And within weeks, his body stopped bracing for impact. Nothing outside changed dramatically, but his internal posture shifted. That is the beginning of a quiet mind. In the next chapter, we're going deeper. We'll dissect the psychological addiction to control, why your brain clings to it, how it disguises itself as responsibility, and how to separate influence from illusion. Because once you see the illusion clearly, you won't be able to unsee it. Chapter 2. The Psychological Addiction to Control. In the previous chapter, we exposed the illusion. Now we need to understand why it feels so compelling. Why does the mind cling so tightly to control, even when control is what exhausts it? The answer is not weakness. It is wiring. Your brain is designed to reduce uncertainty. From an evolutionary perspective, uncertainty once meant danger. If you didn't know what was behind the bushes, you assumed threat. If you couldn't predict the weather, the tribe's safety was compromised. The brain learned a simple rule: predict to survive. That rule still runs today. But modern life is not a jungle. Most uncertainties you face are social, professional, emotional. They are not life or death threats, yet the nervous system responds as if they might be. And here is where the addiction forms. When you attempt to control something, even mentally, the brain receives a short-term reward, a sense of order, a brief drop in ambiguity. It feels productive, even if nothing has actually changed. This is why people rehearse arguments in the shower, why they check messages repeatedly, why they overplan conversations, why they analyze tone in a single sentence. It creates the illusion of movement. But illusion is not influence. To understand this clearly, we need a structure. There are 3 layers most people confuse: control, influence, surrender. Control is direct authority over your own actions, thoughts, and behaviors. Influence is indirect impact on outcomes through effort, communication, and presence. Surrender is acceptance of what remains outside both control and influence. Most anxiety comes from mislabeling influence as control. For example, you can influence how prepared you are for a presentation. You cannot control how every person in the room perceives you. You can influence the tone of a conversation. You cannot control the other person's emotional history or interpretation. You can influence your effort in a relationship. You cannot control whether someone chooses to stay. But when the brain blurs these lines, it assigns responsibility where there is none. And responsibility triggers vigilance. A Stanford study on stress perception found that individuals who believed they had to manage or eliminate stress experienced significantly higher physiological activation than those who viewed stress as something to navigate rather than control. The belief amplified the body's response. The same principle applies here. When you believe you must control outcomes, your body prepares for threat, even when there isn't one. This is not dramatic. It is subtle. A tightening in the chest, a constant scanning of possibilities, a background hum of what if. The addiction to control is not loud dominance. It is quiet, hyper-responsibility. And here is where most people sabotage themselves. They mistake anxiety for responsibility. They think, if I stop worrying, I'll become careless. If I stop managing everything mentally, things will fall apart. But worry is not responsibility. Worry is mental rehearsal without resolution. Responsibility is aligned action within your actual sphere. When those two become confused, you carry weight that was never assigned to you. Let me introduce you to someone I'll call Maya. Maya is a high-performing professional, organized, reliable, the person everyone depends on, but internally, she is rarely at rest. If a deadline is weeks away, she begins preparing immediately. If a colleague seems distant, she analyzes every recent interaction. If a family member sounds tired on the phone, she assumes she may have said something wrong. Nothing dramatic is occurring, yet her mind never disengages. When asked what would happen if she stopped anticipating every variable, she said, "I'd fall behind, I'd miss something, I'd let people down." But when we examined her actual behavior, something surprising appeared. Her anxiety was not improving her performance, it was draining her cognitive resources. Cognitive load theory explains that working memory has limits. When your mind is occupied with managing hypothetical outcomes, it reduces available capacity for focused, present action. In other words, the more you try to mentally secure the future, the less energy you have for the present. Maya wasn't more prepared because she worried. She was more fatigued. And fatigue often leads to mistakes, the very thing she was trying to avoid. This is the paradox of control addiction. It promises security. It delivers depletion. Your brain prefers illusion over uncertainty because uncertainty feels open-ended. Illusion feels defined. Even a negative prediction feels better than ambiguity. Notice this pattern. When faced with an unknown, the mind often jumps to worst-case scenarios, not because it enjoys fear, but because certainty, even negative certainty, feels more stable than not knowing. If you believe the presentation will go badly, at least you feel prepared. If you believe the relationship will end, at least you brace yourself. But bracing is not the same as stabilizing. Bracing keeps the nervous system engaged. Stability allows it to rest. So how do we untangle this? We introduce a clearer boundary. I call it the sphere of command. Imagine 3 concentric circles. At the center is control. Your actions, your words, your effort, your boundaries, your preparation. The middle circle is influence. How you communicate, how you show up, the energy you bring, the quality of your engagement. The outer circle is outcome, other people's reactions, timing, market shifts, random variables, emotional responses you do not own. Most people live as if all 3 circles belong to them. They wake up trying to manage the outer ring. That is unsustainable. When you operate inside your sphere of command, the inner circle, your nervous system has clear instructions. Act, prepare, respond. When you operate in the outer ring, your instructions are vague. Predict, prevent, control. And vague instructions create anxiety. Here's the retention moment you need to hear clearly. Peace is not found by expanding control. Peace is found by shrinking it to what is actually yours. That is counterintuitive because society praises those who handle everything. But psychologically, trying to handle everything fractures focus. Maya began practicing something simple. Before engaging in any worry spiral, she asked, "Is this inside my sphere of command?" If yes, act. If no, release. At first, it felt irresponsible. Then it felt unfamiliar. Then it felt freeing. Not because uncertainty disappeared, but because misplaced responsibility did. There is another layer beneath this addiction. Control gives the ego identity. If you are the fixer, the planner, the anticipator, the emotional manager, you feel valuable. Letting go of control can feel like letting go of importance, and that is uncomfortable. We will explore that ego pattern deeply later in this audiobook. For now, simply recognize that control is not only about safety, it is also about identity. When you reduce control to your true sphere of command, something subtle shifts. You move from hypervigilance to intentionality, from constant forecasting to deliberate action, from mental noise to focused presence. This does not mean you become passive, it means you become precise. Precision is powerful. Scattered control is exhausting. Let's return to the brain for a moment. When uncertainty appears, the amygdala flags potential threat. The prefrontal cortex attempts to interpret and solve. If the problem is solvable through action, resolution occurs. If it is not solvable, because it involves external variables, the loop continues. That loop is rumination. Rumination increases cortisol. Elevated cortisol maintains alertness. Sustained alertness prevents restoration, and restoration is required for calm cognition. So the addiction to control becomes biochemical. You feel tense because your body is responding to perceived unsolved threat. But if the threat is outside your sphere of command, it cannot be solved through mental rehearsal. It can only be accepted. Acceptance is not defeat, it is accurate labeling. When you accurately label what is yours and what is not, cognitive load decreases. Less load means more clarity. More clarity means better decisions. Better decisions means stronger influence. Ironically, surrendering false control increases real influence because your energy is no longer divided. There is a moment in this process where resistance spikes. Your mind will say, "But if I stop thinking about it, something will go wrong." That voice is the addiction speaking. It confuses tension with effectiveness. But tension is not proof of productivity. Often it is proof of misdirected responsibility. Right now, think about one area where you feel persistent mental strain. Is it truly inside your inner circle, or have you stepped into the outer ring? The sphere of command is not a motivational slogan. It is a cognitive filter. Every worry passes through it. If it lands in control, act. If it lands in influence, communicate. If it lands in outcome, release. Release does not mean you stop caring, it means you stop gripping. And gripping is what exhausts you. In the next chapter, we will dismantle something even more foundational, the belief that your thoughts are facts. Because if you cannot separate yourself from your thoughts, you will continue trying to control what those thoughts predict. And once you learn to step back from them, your relationship with uncertainty will begin to change permanently.
Chapter 3. You are not your thoughts. Part 1. There's a sentence that changes everything once you truly understand it. You are not your thoughts. At first, that sounds philosophical, almost abstract, but psychologically, it is precise. Most anxiety does not persist because thoughts exist. It persists because you identify with them. A thought appears, "I'm going to fail." And instead of recognizing it as a mental event, you experience it as reality. A thought says, "They're disappointed in me." And instead of examining it, you absorb it. This merging between you and your thoughts is called cognitive fusion. When you are cognitively fused, thoughts feel like facts, predictions feel like certainties, emotional impulses feel like truth. There is no distance. And without distance, there is no evaluation. Imagine wearing tinted glasses your entire life without realizing it. You wouldn't say, "The world looks red through this lens." You would say, "The world is red." Fusion works the same way. When the mind says, "You're not good enough," the fused identity responds, "I am not good enough." There is no separation between observer and narrative. This is where suffering intensifies. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most researched psychological treatments in modern clinical science, is built on a foundational insight.
Thoughts are not facts. Decades of outcome studies demonstrate that when individuals learn to evaluate and restructure distorted thinking patterns, anxiety and depression symptoms decrease significantly. The effectiveness does not come from suppressing thoughts, it comes from separating from them. That separation is the beginning of a quiet mind. Inside you, there are two distinct processes operating constantly: the narrator and the observer. The narrator generates commentary. It predicts, judges, remembers, anticipates. It tells stories about what is happening and what might happen next. The observer notices. The narrator says, "This will go badly." The observer says, "I am noticing the thought that this will go badly." That subtle shift creates space, and space weakens anxiety. When you are fused, thoughts feel like facts. Predictions feel like certainties. Emotional impulses feel like truth. Let's look at a contrast. Before separation. "I can't believe I said that. I always ruin things. They must think I'm incompetent. This is going to damage everything." Notice the language: absolute, predictive, catastrophic. After separation. "I'm noticing that I'm telling myself I always ruin things. That sounds like overgeneralization. What actually happened?" The second voice is calmer, curious, measured. It does not deny emotion, it questions distortion. That questioning is not self-criticism, it is cognitive clarity. Here's where many people misunderstand. Separating from thoughts does not mean you become cold or detached. It means you become discerning. You stop automatically believing every mental sentence that appears. Because the mind produces thousands of thoughts per day. Some are useful. Some are protective, some are distorted, some are simply noise. Fusion treats all of them as urgent. Separation sorts them. Let me introduce you to someone I'll call Adrian. Adrian struggled with social anxiety for years. Before meetings, his mind would generate rapid predictions. "They'll see I'm nervous, I'll stumble, I'll look incompetent." His heart would race before he even entered the room. When asked whether those outcomes had consistently occurred, he admitted they hadn't. Sometimes he felt awkward, often nothing unusual happened, but the thought felt convincing every time.
There is no judge. The verdict is immediate. Guilty. Threat confirmed. Anxiety activated. The mental courtroom interrupts this automatic verdict. Step 1. Identify the claim clearly. What exactly is the thought accusing you of? Be precise. Step 2. Demand evidence. Not feelings, not impressions. Evidence. What observable facts support this claim? Step 3. Present counter-evidence. When has this not been true? What alternative explanations exist? Step 4. Assess probability. Is this outcome inevitable or merely possible? Step 5. Deliver a balanced verdict. Not blind optimism, not catastrophic certainty. Balanced realism. Let's apply this in real time. Thought: my manager is disappointed in me because her email was short. Claim: she is disappointed. Evidence: the email was brief. Counter-evidence: she often writes concise emails. She provided positive feedback last week. No criticism was expressed. Probability: brief communication does not equal dissatisfaction. Verdict: insufficient evidence to conclude disappointment. Notice what happened. The emotional spike decreases, not because you forced positivity, but because you challenged distortion. Around this point, this is where many listeners feel a shift. You begin to realize how often the prosecutor has been operating without scrutiny, how many verdicts you accepted without trial. That realization can feel both empowering and uncomfortable, because it means some suffering was sustained by unexamined belief. But here is the transformation. If thoughts are not you, then you are not broken when anxious thoughts appear. You are human. Thought production is automatic. Belief is optional. Adrian practiced the mental courtroom daily for small worries, emails, conversations, minor uncertainties. Within weeks, something subtle changed. His thoughts did not disappear, but their authority weakened.
Instead of spiraling for hours, he evaluated and moved forward. The difference was not dramatic externally, but internally he felt less gripped, less controlled by mental noise. That is identity separation in action. When you say, "I am anxious," fusion is present. When you say anxiety is arising, separation begins. Language matters. It shapes perception. You are the observer of your thoughts, not their prisoner. This does not mean you will never feel fear again. It means fear will not automatically dictate your behavior. When catastrophic predictions appear, you now have tools. You have a courtroom. You have a judge. You have evidence. And most importantly, you have distance. Distance creates calm. Calm creates clarity. Clarity creates aligned action. The addiction to control we discussed earlier is fueled by fusion. If you believe every prediction your mind generates, you will attempt to control every imagined threat. But once you separate from those predictions, urgency softens. You realize many threats were hypothetical constructions, and hypothetical constructions do not require real-world bracing. Right now, try something simple. Notice your next spontaneous thought. Label it gently. Planning, predicting, judging. Just notice. No suppression, no argument. Observation alone weakens fusion. And as that space grows, something powerful happens. You begin to trust yourself. Not because the world became certain, but because you can evaluate uncertainty without collapsing into it. That is the beginning of psychological freedom. In the next chapter, we will go even deeper into distortion itself, identifying specific cognitive errors that fuel anxiety and learning how to dismantle them systematically. Because once you recognize the patterns behind the prosecutor's arguments, you stop fearing the courtroom entirely.
Chapter 4. Put your thoughts on trial. In the previous chapter, you learned that you are not your thoughts. Now, we move from awareness to discipline. Because awareness without structure fades. Structure creates transformation. This is where the mental courtroom becomes a daily practice instead of a concept. Most anxious thinking follows predictable distortions, catastrophizing, emotional reasoning, probability inflation, mind reading, overgeneralization. These distortions feel convincing because they are fast and automatic. If you do not interrupt them deliberately, they run the trial without opposition. So now we build the courtroom properly. Step 1. Identify the exact charge. When anxiety rises, pause and state the thought clearly, not vaguely, not emotionally, precisely. Instead of saying, "Everything is falling apart," narrow it. What exactly am I predicting? Specificity weakens distortion. If the charge is undefined, it cannot be examined. Step 2. Separate feeling from fact. Anxiety often disguises emotion as evidence. "I feel like they're upset with me" becomes "they are upset with me." This is emotional reasoning. The feeling becomes the proof. But feelings are signals, not verdicts. So ask, what objective evidence supports this thought? Not tone interpretation, not assumption, evidence. Step 3. Present counter-evidence. The anxious mind is an excellent prosecutor, but a poor defense attorney. You must deliberately present the other side. When has this prediction been wrong before? What alternative explanations exist? What data contradicts the claim? This step often creates the first drop in intensity. Step 4. Correct probability distortion. Anxiety inflates possibility into inevitability. Possible becomes probable. Probable becomes certain. So ask, is this guaranteed, or merely one possible outcome among many? Most feared scenarios are statistically unlikely, yet the mind treats them as imminent. Correcting probability restores perspective. Step 5. Deliver a balanced verdict. Not blind optimism, not dismissal, balanced realism. This outcome is possible, but not certain. I have handled similar situations before. I will respond if necessary. Notice the tone. Calm, grounded, measured. That is the voice of the judge. Now let's examine catastrophizing more closely. Catastrophizing is the mind's habit of jumping from minor uncertainty to extreme consequence. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A small mistake becomes career collapse. A disagreement becomes relationship failure. Catastrophizing accelerates fear by skipping intermediate steps. It compresses time, and because it moves quickly, it feels convincing. Expose it by slowing it down. If the thought says, "This presentation will ruin everything," ask, "How exactly?" What specific chain of events would have to occur? How likely is each step? When broken down, catastrophic chains often collapse under scrutiny. Now let's examine emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning says, if I feel anxious, something must be wrong. But anxiety can arise from habit, memory, or imagination, not present danger. Your body can react to thoughts as if they are real. That does not mean they are. Anxiety is a signal to evaluate, not a command to obey. When you separate emotion from fact, intensity decreases. This is where many listeners experience the retention spike, the realization that anxiety loses power when examined. Let me introduce you to someone I'll call Lena. Lena feared public speaking intensely. Before presentations, her heart pounded, her hands shook, and her mind screamed, "You're going to freeze." She interpreted the physical sensation as confirmation. I feel terrified, that means I will fail. That is emotional reasoning.
We applied the mental courtroom. Charge: I will freeze and humiliate myself. Evidence: my heart is racing. Counter-evidence: I have completed presentations before. I know the material. Racing heart does not equal freezing. Probability: discomfort likely. Complete collapse unlikely. Verdict: anxiety present. Failure not inevitable. The first time she practiced this, anxiety did not vanish, but it reduced. The second time, it reduced faster. Within weeks, something surprising happened. She began feeling nervous, but not terrified. Her relationship with the sensation changed. And this is the promised payoff. When you consistently apply structured evaluation, approximately 80% of everyday anxiety dissolves. Not because life becomes predictable, but because distortion loses credibility. The remaining 20% is normal human uncertainty, and that is manageable. Now I want you to experience this directly. Think of a current worry. Bring it forward clearly. State the charge. Now ask, what is the evidence? What is the counter-evidence? What is the actual probability? Speak the balanced verdict internally. Notice what shifts, even if only slightly. That slight shift matters because repetition compounds it. Here is something important. You are not trying to eliminate negative thinking. You are training discernment. Discernment builds psychological resilience. Resilience reduces control addiction, and reduced control addiction quiets the nervous system. The mental courtroom is not about arguing with yourself endlessly. It is about interrupting automatic conviction. Over time, the prosecutor becomes less dramatic because it knows evidence will be required. Your thoughts begin to self-correct. This is cognitive maturity. You move from reaction to regulation, from assumption to analysis, from panic to perspective. But there is another layer beneath this practice. If you notice resistance to questioning your thoughts, ask why. Sometimes thoughts are protected because they support identity. I am the responsible one. I must anticipate everything. If I relax, I'll fall behind. These beliefs form deeper ego patterns, and when you challenge the thoughts, you begin challenging the identity beneath them. That can feel destabilizing.
Because if you are not the hyper-vigilant planner, who are you? We will explore that identity shift soon. For now, stay with the discipline. Every anxious thought is a case. Every case deserves evidence, and every verdict deserves balance. The quiet mind is not empty. It is orderly. Ordered thinking reduces chaos. Chaos reduction lowers anxiety. This is not motivational language. It is neurological alignment. When the brain perceives clarity, it reduces threat signaling. Reduced threat signaling lowers physiological activation. Lower activation allows recovery. Recovery restores steadiness. Steadiness creates confidence. Confidence reduces the urge to control, and the cycle reverses. You move from bracing to grounded, from catastrophic imagination to measured response. The courtroom becomes internal strength. In the next chapter, we shift into something equally powerful: speed, the pace of your thinking, because even accurate evaluation becomes distorted when your mind moves too fast. And once you learn to slow the internal tempo, the quiet mind becomes not just possible, but sustainable.
Chapter 4. Put your thoughts on trial. In the previous chapter, you learned that you are not your thoughts. Now we move from awareness to discipline, because awareness without structure fades. Structure creates transformation. Most anxious thinking follows predictable distortions: catastrophizing, emotional reasoning, probability inflation, mind reading, overgeneralization. These distortions feel convincing because they are fast and automatic. If you do not interrupt them deliberately, they run the trial without opposition. So now we build the courtroom properly. The mental courtroom is not a metaphor meant to sound poetic. It is a cognitive intervention, a structured evaluation system designed to interrupt distortion before it escalates into physiological anxiety. Let's walk through the 5 steps carefully. Step 1. Identify the exact charge. When anxiety rises, pause and state the thought clearly, not vaguely, not emotionally, precisely. Instead of saying everything is falling apart, narrow it. What exactly am I predicting? I will make a mistake during the presentation. They think I'm incompetent. This relationship is ending. Specificity weakens distortion. If the charge is undefined, it cannot be examined. An undefined fear grows. A defined fear can be tested. Step 2. Separate feeling from fact. Anxiety often disguises emotion as evidence. I feel like they're upset with me becomes they are upset with me. This is emotional reasoning. The feeling becomes the proof. But feelings are signals, not verdicts. So ask, what objective evidence supports this thought? Not tone interpretation, not imagination, not body sensation. Evidence. What was actually said? What was actually done? What was actually observed? When you separate sensation from situation, intensity drops slightly. That slight drop matters. Step 3. Present counter-evidence. The anxious mind is an excellent prosecutor but a poor defense attorney. It presents only confirming information. You must deliberately present the other side. When has this prediction been wrong before? What alternative explanations exist? Could there be a neutral reason? Could there be a positive interpretation? Even one credible alternative weakens catastrophic certainty. Step 4. Correct probability distortion. Anxiety inflates possibility into inevitability.
Possible becomes probable. Probable becomes certain. So ask, is this guaranteed or merely one possible outcome among many? If it is one possibility, what are the others? Write them mentally. List 3 alternatives. The act of generating alternatives restores cognitive balance. Step 5.
Deliver a balanced verdict. Not blind optimism, not denial, balanced realism. This outcome is possible, but not certain. I have managed similar situations before. I will respond if needed. Notice the tone, calm, measured, grounded. That is the judge speaking. Now let's examine catastrophizing more closely. Catastrophizing is the mind's habit of jumping from minor uncertainty to extreme consequence. A delayed message becomes rejection. A small mistake becomes career collapse. A disagreement becomes relationship failure. Catastrophizing accelerates fear by skipping intermediate steps. It compresses time. Expose it by slowing it down. If the thought says, "This mistake will ruin everything," ask what specific chain of events would have to occur, step by step. How likely is each step? When broken down, catastrophic chains often collapse under scrutiny. They depend on assumptions stacked on assumptions. Now consider emotional reasoning again. I feel anxious, therefore something is wrong. But anxiety can arise from memory, imagination, or anticipation. Your body reacts to thought as if it were real. That does not make it real. Anxiety is a signal to evaluate, not a command to obey. This is where many listeners feel the first major shift. You begin to realize that anxiety loses intensity when examined logically. Not because you suppress it, but because you cross-examine it. You move from passive recipient to active evaluator, and that changes everything. Let me introduce you to someone I'll call Lena. Lena feared public speaking intensely. Before presentations, her heart pounded, her hands shook, and her mind screamed, "You're going to freeze." She interpreted the physical sensation as confirmation. I feel terrified, that means I will fail. Classic emotional reasoning. We applied the mental courtroom. Charge, I will freeze and humiliate myself. Evidence, my heart is racing.
Counter evidence. I have delivered presentations before. I know the material. Nervousness does not equal freezing. Probability. Discomfort likely. Total collapse unlikely. Verdict. Anxiety present. Catastrophe unproven. The first time she practiced this, anxiety did not disappear, but it reduced. And reduction is progress. We are not eliminating fear. We are dismantling distortion. In the next part of this chapter, we will deepen this process, exposing probability illusions further, walking through a full immersive scenario together, and arriving at the moment where most everyday anxiety begins to dissolve. Because once distortion is systematically challenged, it loses authority. There is something important you need to understand before we continue. Your brain prefers speed over accuracy. Fast conclusions conserve energy, but fast conclusions are often distorted. The mental courtroom forces slow thinking, and slow thinking exposes exaggeration. Let's return to Lena briefly. After practicing the 5 steps repeatedly, something subtle changed. Her thoughts did not vanish, but their tone softened. Instead of "you're going to freeze," the thought became "you might feel nervous." That shift may sound small, but it changed her physiological response dramatically. Because certainty creates panic. Possibility creates manageability. This is where the 80% shift occurs. When you consistently challenge catastrophic certainty and probability distortion, roughly 80% of everyday anxiety dissolves. Not because life becomes predictable, but because most anxiety is distortion-driven. The remaining 20% is natural uncertainty, and natural uncertainty does not require panic. Now let's immerse you directly in this process. Imagine you send an important email. Hours pass. No reply. Your mind begins. They're upset. I said something wrong. This is bad. Pause. Step 1. State the charge. They are upset with me because they haven't responded. Step 2. Evidence. No response yet. Step 3. Counter evidence. They may be busy. They often respond later. No negative feedback was given. Step 4. Probability. Delayed response is common. Emotional conclusion uncertain. Step 5. Verdict. There is insufficient evidence to conclude negativity. I will wait. Notice the shift. The body softens slightly. Breathing slows. This is regulation through cognition. Now let's address probability distortion directly. Ask yourself, how often have you predicted disaster that did not occur? How many times has your mind exaggerated outcome severity? The anxious mind has a low accuracy rate, yet we treat it as authoritative. When you begin tracking prediction accuracy, trust shifts from fear to evidence, and evidence rarely supports catastrophe. There is another distortion hidden here: mind reading. Assuming you know what others think. This often drives control addiction. If you believe you can predict someone's reaction, you attempt to manage it. But you cannot read minds. You can only interpret behavior. And interpretation is not certainty. The courtroom demands humility. It reminds you that thought is hypothesis, not verdict. As this becomes habitual, something powerful emerges: emotional steadiness. Not because you are indifferent, but because you are grounded in evaluation. This steadiness reduces the urge to control outcomes prematurely. You no longer rush to prevent imagined disaster. You wait for evidence. You respond to reality, not imagination. Over time, this rewires confidence. Confidence does not mean nothing bad will happen. It means if something happens, I will handle it. That belief replaces catastrophic certainty. And when that belief strengthens, anxiety decreases naturally. Here is the deeper layer. If you resist questioning your thoughts, ask why. Sometimes thoughts are protected because they support identity. I am the one who anticipates problems. I must stay alert. If I relax, I lose control. These are ego patterns, and challenging thoughts begins challenging identity. That can feel destabilizing, because if you are not the hypervigilant protector, who are you? We will explore that identity shift soon. For now, remain disciplined. Every anxious thought is a case. Every case requires evidence, and every verdict deserves balance. The quiet mind is not empty, it is ordered. Ordered thinking reduces chaos. Reduced chaos lowers anxiety. This is not motivational language, it is cognitive architecture. When the brain perceives clarity, it reduces threat signaling. Reduced threat signaling lowers physiological activation. Lower activation allows restoration. Restoration creates steadiness. Steadiness reduces control addiction, and the cycle reverses. You move from bracing to grounded, from catastrophic imagination to measured response. The courtroom becomes internal authority. In the next chapter, we will shift into something equally powerful: speed, the pace of your thinking. Because even accurate evaluation becomes distorted when your mind moves too fast. And once you learn to slow your internal tempo, calm stops being temporary and becomes sustainable. Chapter 5. The Slow Mind in a Fast World. Speed feels powerful. Fast responses, fast decisions, fast reactions. In modern culture, speed is associated with competence. If you answer quickly, you are sharp. If you react immediately, you are engaged. If you multitask efficiently, you are productive.
But psychologically, speed is not always strength. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, introduced a powerful framework: System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional, reactive. It operates effortlessly and instantly. It recognizes patterns and makes snap judgments. System 2 is slow, deliberate, analytical. It requires effort. It questions assumptions. It evaluates evidence. Both are necessary, but anxiety thrives in System 1. When your mind moves quickly, it jumps to conclusions. It fills gaps instantly. It interprets silence as rejection. It interprets uncertainty as threat. Speed compresses evaluation, and compressed evaluation produces distortion. When the mind is fast, the nervous system follows. The sympathetic nervous system activates. Heart rate increases. Muscles tighten. Breathing shortens. The body prepares for action. This is not wrong. It is biological. The problem arises when fast thinking becomes the default state. Many people live in chronic System 1 activation, constant scanning, constant reacting, constant urgency. And urgency feels productive. That is the illusion. Urgency creates adrenaline. Adrenaline creates energy. Energy feels like movement, but movement is not always progress. Urgency often bypasses clarity. It replaces evaluation with impulse. It replaces discernment with reaction. Here is the subtle trap.
When you slow down, it can feel uncomfortable. It can feel like you are falling behind. It can feel irresponsible, because your brain has equated speed with control. But control addiction thrives in speed. When you think quickly, you do not question distorted predictions. You act on them. Slowing down introduces friction, and friction allows awareness. Let me introduce you to someone I'll call Marcus. Marcus prided himself on quick responses. In meetings, he answered immediately. In conversations, he reacted instantly. If a message came in, he replied within seconds. He believed this demonstrated competence, but internally he was exhausted. He rarely paused long enough to evaluate his emotional state. If something irritated him, he responded. If something worried him, he acted. He was constantly in motion. One day, during a particularly stressful week, he snapped at a colleague. The reaction was small but noticeable. Later, he admitted something quietly. "I don't remember thinking before I spoke." That is System 1 dominance, reaction before reflection. We implemented a simple rule: 3 breaths before response. Not dramatic, not visible, just internal delay. At first, it felt unnatural. Then it felt stabilizing. The pause created space between stimulus and reaction, and in that space, System 2 could engage. When System 2 engages, distortion weakens. The nervous system begins to regulate. Regulation is not about eliminating stress. It is about preventing chronic activation. Chronic activation leads to cognitive fatigue, and cognitive fatigue has psychological consequences. When the brain is tired, it defaults to shortcuts. Shortcuts increase distortion. Distortion increases anxiety. Anxiety increases urgency. Urgency increases fatigue. The cycle becomes self-reinforcing. Burnout is not always about workload. Often it is about unregulated cognitive speed. The mind never disengages. Even during rest, it scans. Even during silence, it predicts. That constant velocity drains clarity. There is a retention moment here that matters. You do not need to control more. You need to slow down more. Speed amplifies anxiety. Slowness restores precision. Marcus discovered something surprising. When he paused before responding, he appeared more composed, not less competent, more deliberate.
His words carried weight because they were chosen, not reflexive. The slow mind is not lazy. It is accurate. In the next part of this chapter, we will go deeper into nervous system regulation, explore why urgency creates a false sense of productivity, and walk through a guided breathing and pacing exercise that recalibrates your mental tempo. Because once you experience intentional slowness, you begin to understand its power.
Your nervous system has two primary states relevant to this conversation. Sympathetic activation, fight or flight. Parasympathetic regulation, rest and restore. When you live in constant mental speed, sympathetic activation becomes baseline. You may not feel panic, but you feel tight, alert, on edge. That state consumes energy. The parasympathetic system, particularly through the vagus nerve, activates when breathing slows, posture softens, and perception of threat decreases. Slowness signals safety. Speed signals urgency. Here's the emotional contrast. Think about the last time you rushed. Notice your breathing. Short, shallow. Notice your jaw. Tight. Notice your shoulders. Elevated. Now imagine moving deliberately, breathing slower, speaking slower, walking slightly slower. The body interprets that shift as safety, and safety reduces anxiety. But urgency feels productive. When you rush, you feel important, you feel needed, you feel efficient. That is the emotional reward. But productivity without regulation leads to burnout. Burnout psychology shows that sustained cognitive load without adequate recovery decreases executive functioning. Decision-making declines, emotional regulation weakens, irritability increases. Speed depletes control. Slowness restores it. Let's return briefly to Marcus. After practicing deliberate pauses for several weeks, something changed internally. He described it this way: "I don't feel like I'm chasing my own thoughts anymore." That statement matters. When your thoughts move faster than your awareness, you feel chased. When awareness matches pace, you feel steady. Now we move into a direct exercise. This is not meditation, it is recalibration. Sit comfortably. Inhale slowly through your nose for 4 seconds. Hold gently for 2. Exhale through your mouth for 6. Repeat. 4 in, 2 hold, 6 out. As you breathe, notice the pace of your thoughts. Do not fight them. Just observe their speed. Now deliberately slow your internal voice. If your mind is narrating quickly, reduce its tempo slightly.
Imagine reading a sentence more slowly. Pause between phrases. Allow silence between thoughts. This may feel artificial at first. That is normal. You are interrupting habit. Continue breathing. With each exhale, release urgency. Not responsibility, urgency. Notice your shoulders. Soften them. Notice your jaw. Relax it. After several cycles, something subtle shifts. The body signals safety. The mind follows. This is how you regulate speed intentionally, not by suppressing thought, but by adjusting tempo. When you consistently slow your mental pacing, distortion decreases. Because distortion thrives in speed. Evaluation thrives in slowness.
This is where the deeper identity shift begins. If you are not the fast reactor, who are you? If you are not the one who responds instantly, who are you becoming? You are becoming deliberate. Deliberate is powerful. Deliberate reduces control addiction, because deliberate minds do not grip outcomes. They respond to reality. In the next chapter, we will explore emotional regulation more deeply, because slowing thought is only part of the equation. Understanding emotion without suppressing it is the next layer of the quiet mind. And once you integrate both, speed will no longer control you. You will control your pace.
Chapter 6. Emotional Regulation Without Suppression. Many people misunderstand emotional regulation. They believe regulation means control. They believe control means suppression, and suppression feels like strength. But suppression is not strength. Suppression is compression. When you suppress emotion, you do not eliminate it. You postpone it. You push it beneath awareness. You tighten around it. Processing is different. Processing means acknowledging the emotion, allowing it to be present and responding intentionally instead of reflexively. Suppression says, I shouldn't feel this. Processing says, I notice this feeling. That difference changes the nervous system. When emotion arises, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, activates rapidly. It does not wait for logic. It scans for danger based on memory and pattern recognition. If something resembles past threat, even symbolically, the amygdala triggers a response. Heart rate increases, breathing shifts, attention narrows. This happens before conscious thought. If you respond by suppressing the emotion, telling yourself to ignore it, dismiss it, or overpower it, the body often interprets that as additional threat. Why? Because suppression communicates danger. If a feeling must be pushed away, the brain assumes it is unsafe. Research in affect labeling, the act of naming emotions, shows something powerful. When individuals simply label what they are feeling, the amygdala activation decreases and prefrontal cortex activity increases. In other words, naming emotion reduces its intensity. This is regulation through acknowledgement, not suppression. Self-compassion research further supports this. Studies led by Dr. Kristen Neff and others demonstrate that individuals who respond to emotional distress with self-compassion experience lower levels of anxiety and depression. Harsh self-judgment amplifies distress. Gentle acknowledgement reduces it. Yet many people believe compassion equals weakness. It does not. It equals nervous system safety. Let's look at the difference clearly. Suppression says, I shouldn't be anxious about this. Stop overreacting. This is stupid. Processing says, I'm feeling anxious right now. This matters to me. My body is responding to uncertainty. The first tightens. The second softens. Now here is where most people struggle. They fear that allowing emotion means drowning in it. They imagine that if they open the door even slightly, it will overwhelm them. But emotional waves are temporary when allowed.
They become chronic when resisted. Let me introduce you to someone I'll call Sophia. Sophia grew up in an environment where emotional expression was discouraged. Strength meant composure. Composure meant silence. When she felt hurt, she swallowed it. When she felt angry, she redirected it inward. When she felt anxious, she criticized herself. Externally, she appeared calm. Internally, she was exhausted.
During a stressful period at work, her anxiety intensified. Instead of acknowledging it, she doubled down on suppression. "I don't have time for this." The tension built. Eventually, it surfaced as irritability. Small comments triggered disproportionate reactions. She was not weak, she was compressed. We began with one simple practice: naming. Not analyzing, not solving. Naming. When anxiety rose, she would say quietly, "Anxiety is here." When frustration appeared, "Frustration is here." At first, it felt pointless. Then something subtle shifted. The intensity reduced slightly, because the emotion no longer had to fight for acknowledgement. This is the retention moment you need to internalize. Emotion does not demand control, it demands recognition. When recognized, it often settles. When suppressed, it escalates. Now let's move into a guided exercise. Close your eyes briefly. Recall a recent emotional reaction. Not the story, the sensation. Where did you feel it in your body? Chest? Throat? Stomach? Place attention there. Now label it simply: anger, fear, sadness. Say it internally. No judgment, no correction, just naming. Notice what happens to the sensation. Often, it shifts slightly. That shift is regulation. Not because the problem vanished, but because the body feels seen. In the next part of this chapter, we will deepen this process, explore a before and after emotional contrast, and I will share something personal, a moment where I misunderstood suppression for strength. Because emotional maturity is not about control, it is about capacity.
There was a period in my own life when I believed composure meant silence. I believed that if I could stay calm externally, I was regulated internally. But I wasn't regulated. I was contained. There is a difference. During a difficult professional setback, I told myself to remain composed, to not react, to move forward. I avoided acknowledging disappointment because it felt indulgent. Weeks later, that unprocessed emotion surfaced as exhaustion. Not dramatic burnout, just quiet depletion. I realized something uncomfortable. I had been suppressing disappointment while pretending to be disciplined. That is vulnerability, and it matters because many high-functioning individuals do the same. They confuse endurance with processing. Endurance delays emotion. Processing integrates it. Let's examine a before and after contrast. Before processing, emotion arises. I shouldn't feel this. Suppress. Tension builds. Later reaction amplified. After processing, emotion arises. I notice sadness. Pause. Breathe. Allow sensation. Intensity peaks, then decreases. The external situation may not change, but the internal escalation does. This is how you prevent emotional spillover. When emotion is acknowledged early, it does not need to shout later. Let's revisit Sophia. After practicing emotional labeling for several weeks, she noticed something important. Her reactions shortened. Instead of staying irritated for hours, frustration lasted minutes. Instead of spiraling into self-criticism, anxiety softened faster. The emotion still came, but it moved. That movement is health. Suppression freezes emotion in place. Processing allows flow. Now let's briefly return to the amygdala. The amygdala reacts quickly to perceived threat, but the prefrontal cortex regulates response when engaged. Naming emotion activates cognitive processing. This is not philosophical, it is neurological. When you say, "I am feeling anxious," you recruit cognitive processing. And cognition moderates intensity. Here is another layer. Self-compassion does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It means responding to emotional distress with understanding instead of attack. If you make a mistake and immediately say, "I'm terrible," you amplify shame. If you say, "That was difficult, I'm learning," you create psychological safety. Safety reduces defensive escalation. Now, let's do another brief exercise. Think of something you regret. Notice the immediate emotional response. Now respond with two different internal statements. First, "I shouldn't have done that. I always mess things up." Notice how your body feels. Now, second, "That was painful. I wish I had handled it differently. I'm human." Notice the difference. The second does not deny responsibility. It removes attack. Regulation without suppression means allowing emotion while choosing response. It means feeling without flooding. It means acknowledging without amplifying. Here is the emotional contrast spike. Many people believe they are overwhelmed by emotion. In reality, they are overwhelmed by resistance to emotion. Resistance creates tension. Tension magnifies intensity. Release reduces it. When you stop fighting emotion, you free energy. That energy can be redirected into aligned action. Emotional regulation strengthens identity because you no longer fear your own reactions. You trust your capacity to experience discomfort without collapsing. And that trust reduces the urge to control external outcomes prematurely. In the next chapter, we will examine ego patterns that sabotage peace. Because beneath suppression, beneath control addiction, beneath urgency, there are identity attachments quietly operating. And once those are exposed, calm becomes not just a practice, but a way of being.
Chapter 7. The ego patterns that sabotage peace. Up to this point, we have talked about control, thought distortion, speed, and emotion. Now we move deeper. Because beneath anxiety, beneath urgency, beneath suppression, there is something quieter. Identity. Not your values, not your character, your ego patterns. Ego in this context is not arrogance, it is attachment. Attachment to being right. Attachment to being perceived a certain way. Attachment to control disguised as responsibility. These attachments quietly sabotage peace. Let's begin with one of the most common, the attachment to being right. Being right feels stabilizing. When you are right, your perception feels confirmed. Your interpretation feels validated. Your ego feels secure. But when someone disagrees with you, something subtle activates. Defensiveness. Even if the disagreement is minor, the body tightens. The mind prepares counterarguments. Why? Because disagreement threatens identity. If your ego is attached to correctness, being wrong feels like diminishment. But here is the truth. Peace requires flexibility. Rigidity creates tension. When your identity is fused with being right, every disagreement becomes a threat, and threats activate anxiety. Now consider the external validation loop. Many people unconsciously regulate their emotional state through others' approval. If someone praises them, they feel steady. If someone criticizes them, they feel destabilized. If someone withdraws, they feel uncertain. This creates dependency. Your peace becomes contingent. Your calm depends on reaction. That is fragile. External validation is not inherently harmful, but when it becomes the primary regulator of self-worth, anxiety increases. Because you cannot control others' perceptions fully. And so the control addiction resurfaces. You analyze tone. You monitor reactions. You anticipate disappointment. You attempt to manage image. This is ego disguised as responsibility. It says, I must ensure everyone is comfortable.
I must make sure no one is upset. I must maintain harmony at all costs. But harmony built on self-erasure is not peace. It is tension in disguise. Here's the first retention spike. Most people who struggle with anxiety are not selfish. They are over-responsible. But over-responsibility can be ego attachment in subtle form. It positions you as the emotional stabilizer of every environment, and that role is exhausting. Let me introduce you to someone I'll call Daniel. Daniel believed he was the steady one in his friend group, the mediator, the fixer. If conflict rose, he stepped in. If tension appeared, he smoothed it. At first glance, this seems noble, but internally, Daniel felt constant pressure. If two friends argued, he felt personally accountable. If someone was distant, he assumed he had failed to maintain cohesion. His identity was attached to being the stabilizer. When asked what would happen if he stopped managing others' emotions, he hesitated. They might drift apart. And what would that mean about you? That I didn't do enough. Notice the attachment. Not just to harmony, to identity. If he was not the fixer, who was he? This is where control disguises itself as responsibility. You believe you are being mature, but internally you are managing perception. And managing perception is not sustainable. Now let's address psychological projection. Projection occurs when we attribute our internal states to others. If you feel insecure, you may assume others are judging you. If you feel irritated, you may assume others are hostile. Projection protects ego. It externalizes discomfort, but it distorts reality. If you assume someone dislikes you based on your own insecurity, you react defensively. That defensive reaction alters the interaction, and suddenly your projection appears confirmed. This reinforces anxiety. Projection and validation loops work together. You project fear. You monitor response. You adjust behavior to secure approval, all in the name of responsibility. But beneath it is attachment. Attachment to image. Attachment to identity. Attachment to being needed. The ego whispers, if I let go, I lose importance. If I stop managing, I become irrelevant. But peace requires a different identity, one not built on constant maintenance of perception. In the next segment, we will deepen this examination, explore a relationship-based example, introduce a high-tension reframing that disrupts ego attachment, and move toward the discipline layer that transforms identity entirely. Because until ego patterns are exposed, calm remains conditional.
Let's look at a relationship example. Imagine you are in a conversation with someone close to you. They respond briefly. Your mind reacts. They're annoyed. I did something wrong. I need to fix this. Notice the immediate shift into responsibility. But what if their briefness has nothing to do with you? What if they're tired, preoccupied, processing something internally? When your ego is attached to maintaining harmony, ambiguity feels threatening. You rush to repair. You over-explain. You apologize prematurely. Not because harm occurred, but because your identity depends on stability. This is where anxiety and ego intertwine. You fear not just outcome, you fear diminished importance. Here is the high-tension reframing. What if you are not responsible for maintaining every emotional atmosphere you enter? What if your only responsibility is to show up with integrity? That reframing destabilizes ego attachment because it removes the illusion of centrality. You are not the axis of every reaction. That realization can feel both freeing and uncomfortable. Freeing because the burden lifts, uncomfortable because importance shifts. Daniel eventually tested something radical.
He stopped intervening in a minor disagreement between two friends. He allowed silence. He allowed tension. He resisted the urge to mediate. Internally, anxiety spiked. He feared collapse. But something unexpected happened. The friends resolved it themselves, and Daniel felt something unfamiliar: relief. He had mistaken control for necessity. This is the emotional shift. Peace increases when ego-centrality decreases. When you stop positioning yourself as the stabilizer of every dynamic, nervous system load decreases. Now consider the attachment to being right again. Ask yourself, how often do you argue internally after conversations? How often do you replay moments to confirm correctness? This mental rehearsal maintains tension because your ego seeks validation retroactively. But validation is not required for stability. Flexibility is. When someone challenges you, try this instead. Interesting, that's a different perspective. Not defensively, curiously. Notice the internal relaxation. You are not surrendering intelligence, you are surrendering rigidity. Rigidity creates fragility. Flexibility creates resilience. Here is another subtle ego pattern: the need to be perceived as strong. Some people suppress emotion not just from fear, but from image maintenance. If I show vulnerability, I lose authority. But vulnerability, when grounded, builds authenticity. Suppression builds distance. Distance increases isolation. Isolation increases anxiety. Everything connects. Ego patterns are not flaws. They are survival adaptations. But survival mode is not peace. Peace requires identity evolution. If you are not the fixer, not the constant validator seeker, not the always right defender, who are you becoming? You are becoming disciplined. Disciplined in thought, disciplined in emotional response, disciplined in responsibility boundaries. And discipline is the next layer, because without discipline, insight fades. In the next chapter, we will explore action over outcome, how to redirect energy from controlling results to mastering effort. Because when identity shifts from ego attachment to disciplined action, peace becomes self-sustaining.
Chapter 8. Action over outcome. Up to this point, you have examined control, thought distortion, ego attachment, and emotional regulation. Now we move into discipline. Not harsh discipline, not rigid self-punishment, but directional discipline. This chapter centers on a principle that has anchored resilient minds for centuries: action over outcome. The Stoic philosophers understood something modern psychology continues to confirm. Suffering increases when we attach emotional stability to results outside our control. Epictetus wrote that some things are up to us, and some are not. Yet most anxiety arises from confusing the two. We obsess over outcomes. Will they approve? Will it succeed? Will it fail? Will I be judged? Outcome fixation creates emotional volatility because outcomes are influenced by variables beyond your control. Other people's reactions, timing, chance, context. Effort, however, belongs to you. Preparation belongs to you. Integrity belongs to you. Focus belongs to you. This is the shift from outcome orientation to process orientation. Let me introduce a simple three-step discipline model. Step 1. Define controllable action. Before any meaningful event, presentation, conversation, decision, ask one question: what actions are fully within my control? Not the result, the behavior, the preparation, the delivery. You narrow your mental bandwidth to controllable effort. Step 2. Execute without internal commentary. This is crucial. Many people sabotage performance by narrating while acting. Am I doing well? Do they look bored? That didn't sound good. Internal commentary divides cognitive resources. Execution requires presence. You act, you speak, you breathe, without live evaluation. Step 3. Reflect only on effort quality. After the event, you review, but not the outcome. You evaluate effort. Did I prepare sufficiently?
Did I communicate clearly? Did I remain composed? Reflection focused on effort reinforces stability. Reflection focused on outcome reinforces anxiety. Here is the retention spike. Most people do not fail because of incompetence. They fail because they split attention between action and imagined consequences. That split attention drains performance capacity. Performance anxiety is not fear of doing, it is fear of outcome interpretation. Your mind imagines the result. Your body reacts to the imagined result. Heart rate increases, breathing shortens, muscle tension rises, cognitive clarity decreases. Then performance actually suffers, which confirms the fear. This is the loop. Outcome imagination, physiological stress, reduced performance, perceived confirmation. Breaking the loop requires returning to action. Consider a public speaking scenario. Before speaking, anxiety often centers on audience judgment. What if I forget? What if they think I'm unprepared? These are outcome-based fears. Shift to process. What is my first sentence? What is my breathing rhythm? What is my key message? Immediately, the nervous system stabilizes because the mind now holds something actionable. This is not suppression, it is redirection. Now let's examine a micro case study. I'll call her Sarah. Sarah experienced intense anxiety before quarterly team presentations. She rehearsed repeatedly, but during delivery, she monitored facial expressions constantly. If someone looked down, she assumed disengagement. If someone took notes, she assumed criticism. Her focus fragmented. After introducing the 3-step discipline model, we adjusted her preparation. Before presenting, she defined 3 controllable actions: speak slowly, pause between sections, maintain eye contact with at least 3 individuals. That was it. During execution, she committed to 0 internal commentary. If a thought arose, she labeled it later and returned to the sentence. Afterward, she evaluated only effort, not applause, not feedback, not perceived reactions. Over 3 months, her anxiety reduced dramatically, not because outcomes guaranteed praise, but because identity shifted from outcome-dependent to action-centered. This marks the beginning of transformation. When you focus on effort, you become steady. When you focus on outcome, you become reactive. And you are no longer becoming reactive. You are becoming someone steady. In the next segment, we will deepen this transformation arc, examine how identity rewires through repeated process orientation, and prepare for the next stage of psychological evolution. Because action over outcome is not just a strategy, it is identity training.
Identity is not declared. It is reinforced through repetition. Each time you choose action over outcome, you reinforce a new internal narrative. I focus on what I control. I execute without panic. I evaluate effort, not applause. Over time, this narrative stabilizes your nervous system. Let's return briefly to Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to act with virtue and detach from external praise, not because praise is wrong, but because dependence is unstable. If your emotional state rises and falls with outcomes, your baseline becomes unpredictable. But when your emotional state anchors to disciplined action, steadiness increases. Here is how transformation unfolds. Phase 1. Awareness. You recognize outcome fixation. You notice catastrophic imagination. Phase 2, redirection. You consciously return to controllable actions. You execute without commentary. Phase 3, reinforcement. You reflect on effort quality. You praise discipline internally. Over months, not days, identity consolidates. You begin to approach situations differently. Performance anxiety diminishes, not because stakes disappear, but because your emotional regulation strengthens. Let's deepen Sarah's arc. 3 months into process orientation training, something unexpected occurred. Her presentation received mixed feedback. Some executives questioned her proposal. In the past, this would have triggered rumination. She would replay tone, facial expression, word choice. But this time, she paused. She reviewed her effort. Prepared? Yes. Clear? Yes. Composed? Yes. Her conclusion? I did my part. That sentence signaled transformation. She felt mild disappointment, but not destabilization. This is growth. Outcome feedback informs improvement, but it does not define identity. Most people confuse these two. They interpret outcome as self-evaluation. But outcomes are data. Effort is character. Let's break down performance anxiety further. It thrives on imagined future scenarios. Your brain simulates possible failure. The amygdala reacts as if simulation is real. Cortisol increases. Attention narrows. But when you focus on immediate action, simulation reduces. You bring cognition into present execution. The nervous system responds accordingly. Calm increases. This is not mystical, it is neurological. Now imagine applying this beyond performance. Relationships, parenting, career decisions. You cannot control how others respond. You cannot control timing of results. You cannot control every variable. But you can control preparation, communication clarity, emotional regulation, consistency. When identity centers on these, anxiety reduces. Here is the reinforcement. Say this internally before any meaningful action. My responsibility is effort. Repeat it enough times and it becomes reflexive. And reflexive thought shapes identity. You are becoming someone steady, not because life becomes predictable, but because your internal response becomes predictable. This steadiness builds quiet confidence, not loud confidence. Quiet confidence does not require external validation. It requires internal alignment, alignment between action and value. As this identity strengthens, another transformation stage approaches, because action over outcome stabilizes performance. But there remains a deeper layer, attachment to narrative, attachment to the story you tell about yourself. In the next chapter, we will explore how to rewrite that narrative consciously, how to step beyond limiting identity scripts, how to construct a psychological baseline of resilience that does not fluctuate with circumstance. Because steadiness is not the final stage. Integration is, and you are moving there deliberately. Calm is no longer accidental. It is becoming structural.
Chapter 9. The Discipline of a Quiet Mind. Calm is not a personality trait. It is not genetic luck. It is not reserved for monks, philosophers, or people without responsibilities. Calm is trained. And like physical hygiene, mental hygiene must be practiced daily. You brush your teeth every day, not because they're dirty forever, but because maintenance prevents decay. The same principle applies to the mind. Without daily cognitive hygiene,
Anxiety accumulates. Rumination accumulates. Emotional residue accumulates. A quiet mind is not the absence of thought. It is the presence of discipline. Let me introduce a daily cognitive hygiene routine. Simple, repeatable, non-dramatic. Step 1. Morning clarity reset. Before consuming news, messages, or social media, spend 5 minutes identifying 3 controllable actions for the day. Not goals, actions. Send proposal draft. Walk for 20 minutes. Have honest conversation. This primes your mind toward effort rather than outcome. Step 2. Midday mental audit. Pause for 2 minutes. Ask, what am I mentally carrying right now? Name it. Deadline pressure, conversation replay, fear of evaluation. Then ask, is this within my control at this moment? If yes, take one small action. If not, release until designated reflection time. This prevents cognitive clutter from compounding. Step 3. Evening cognitive declutter. Before sleep, write down unresolved concerns. Not solutions, just concerns. This externalizes rumination. The brain relaxes when thoughts are stored outside working memory. This is not motivational advice. This is cognitive load management. Working memory has limits. When overloaded, stress increases. Decision quality declines. Emotional reactivity rises. Mental minimalism addresses this directly. Mental minimalism is the intentional reduction of unnecessary psychological noise.
You do not need to have an opinion on everything. You do not need to solve every future scenario tonight. You do not need to carry conversations from 5 years ago. Most mental suffering arises not from complexity of life, but from excess internal commentary. Minimalism asks, is this thought useful? Is this worry actionable? Is this narrative accurate? If not, it is mental clutter, and clutter consumes energy. Here is the retention spike. Most people attempt to change their emotional state without cleaning their mental environment. It's like spraying perfume in a cluttered room. Temporary relief, no structural shift. Calm requires structure. Now, let's integrate habit stacking. Habit stacking attaches new behaviors to existing routines. After brushing your teeth, perform 2 minutes of breathing. After pouring morning coffee, review controllable actions. After closing your laptop, write tomorrow's top priority. Link calm practices to stable habits. This reduces friction. Discipline thrives when friction decreases. Consider micro case study number 9. I'll call him Daniel. Daniel described his mind as always on. He woke up checking emails, scrolled during meals, watched news before sleep. His cognitive input never paused. We implemented daily cognitive hygiene. Morning clarity reset before phone use. Midday audit alarm at 2 p.m. Evening decluttered journaling. Additionally, he removed evening news consumption. Within 6 weeks, he reported something subtle but profound. Silence. Not literal silence, but reduction of background tension. His baseline anxiety decreased, not because life simplified, but because mental clutter reduced. He described it this way. It feels like I finally have space between thoughts. That space is discipline, not suppression, not avoidance. Intentional reduction of noise. Mental minimalism also requires boundaries, information boundaries, conversation boundaries, expectation boundaries. You do not owe constant availability. You do not owe immediate reaction. You do not owe endless explanation. The disciplined mind chooses when to engage and when to step back. In the next segment, we will examine how daily discipline reshapes identity dialogue, reinforce psychological authority behind these practices,
and prepare for a deeper existential relief that emerges when quiet becomes structural rather than occasional. Because calm practiced daily becomes calm embodied, and embodied calm changes who you believe you are.
Identity is shaped by repetition. If your daily routine reinforces urgency, distraction, and reactivity, identity forms accordingly. I am busy. I am overwhelmed. I am behind. But when daily routine reinforces clarity, containment, and effort-based focus, identity shifts. Let's contrast internal dialogue. Before discipline, I need to respond immediately. I can't miss this. What if this becomes a problem? My mind won't slow down. After consistent cognitive hygiene, I will respond at my scheduled time. This concern is noted for review. I am focusing on one action. My mind slows when I structure it. Notice the shift from helplessness to intentionality. This is not denial of reality. It is structured engagement with reality. Authority in psychology consistently supports these principles. Cognitive behavioral therapy demonstrates that structured thought examination reduces anxiety significantly across multiple clinical trials. Research on self-regulation shows that deliberate routines increase emotional stability. Studies on habit formation confirm that behavior repetition rewires neural pathways. None of this is mystical. It is behavioral science. But knowledge alone does not create quiet. Practice does. Let's deepen Daniel's transformation. 3 months after implementing cognitive hygiene, he faced a stressful period at work. Deadlines tightened, leadership pressure increased, but his daily routine remained intact. Morning clarity reset, midday audit, evening declutter. He noticed stress, but he did not spiral. His words, "Pressure feels like pressure, not panic." That distinction signals identity consolidation. Pressure is external. Panic is internal amplification. Discipline prevents amplification. Let's talk about mental minimalism in relationships. You do not need to win every argument. You do not need to correct every misunderstanding. You do not need to monitor every shift in tone. Selective engagement conserves emotional energy. Is this worth my cognitive investment? If the answer is no, release it. Releasing is not weakness, it is allocation. Cognitive energy is finite. Spend it wisely. Another layer of discipline involves digital boundaries. Silence notifications during deep work. Schedule response windows. Limit consumption of emotionally charged media. You are not fragile, but you are influenceable. Protect your mind accordingly. Here is a simple daily structure you can adopt immediately. Morning, define 3 controllable actions. Midday, audit mental load. Evening, externalize unresolved concerns. Weekly, 1-hour digital detox. Monthly, review habits and refine. Small structure, massive cumulative impact. You are not aiming for perfection, you are building rhythm. Rhythm stabilizes identity. Identity stabilizes emotion. Emotion stabilizes behavior. Behavior reinforces identity. This is the cycle of a quiet mind. But something deeper awaits. Discipline creates quiet. Quiet creates clarity. Clarity reveals truth, and sometimes truth brings existential relief. Relief from the belief that you must fix everything. Relief from the belief that you must control everything. Relief from the belief that you must be everything.
In the next chapter, we will explore that deeper layer, the relief that comes when you accept uncertainty fully, when you release the final illusion of total control, when quiet becomes not just practice, but perspective. Because the disciplined, quiet mind is not rigid, it is flexible, not detached, but grounded. And you are closer to that ground than you realize. Chapter 10. When you stop trying to control others. There is one place where the illusion of control becomes most emotionally charged: relationships. You can train your thoughts. You can regulate your nervous system. You can discipline your actions. But when it comes to other people, control becomes seductive. Because people matter. Their approval matters. Their love matters. Their consistency matters. And when they behave unpredictably, anxiety rises. So the mind responds with strategy, subtle pressure, emotional persuasion, withdrawing affection, over-explaining, monitoring tone, replaying conversations, trying to manage how they feel. But here is the uncomfortable truth. The more you attempt to control others, the less safe you feel. Because control attempts amplify awareness of uncertainty. Let's examine a toxic relationship case study. I'll call her Amina. Amina was in a long-term relationship marked by inconsistency. Her partner alternated between warmth and emotional distance. When he pulled away, her anxiety intensified. She would text repeatedly, ask for reassurance, overanalyze his responses, adjust her tone to regain closeness. When he returned emotionally, she felt temporary relief, but relief was short-lived, because attachment had become entangled with control. She believed, if I communicate perfectly, he will stay consistent. If I manage his mood correctly, he won't withdraw. If I explain enough, he will understand. This is not love. This is anxiety negotiating with unpredictability. Attachment and love are not the same. Attachment says, I need you to behave a certain way so I can feel safe. Love says, I care for you, but I do not control you. Attachment seeks certainty. Love respects autonomy. Attachment monitors. Love observes. Attachment pressures. Love allows. This differentiation changes everything. Here is the retention spike. Most relationship anxiety does not come from lack of love. It comes from attachment disguised as responsibility. You believe you are trying to fix things, but often you are trying to eliminate uncertainty, and uncertainty cannot be eliminated through control. Expectation management becomes essential. Unspoken expectations generate resentment. Unrealistic expectations generate disappointment. Rigid expectations generate conflict. Healthy expectation management asks, what is reasonable to expect? What is within their personality? What is outside my control? Amina's transformation began when she stopped trying to decode every shift. Instead of asking, how do I make him respond differently? She asked, is this dynamic aligned with my values? That question returned power inward. Control over him was illusion. Choice over her participation was real. Emotional boundary psychology clarifies this further. A boundary is not a demand that others change. It is a statement of what you will tolerate. It is not, you must text me back immediately. It is, if communication remains inconsistent, I will reconsider this relationship. Notice the difference. Control attempts to alter behavior. Boundaries clarify consequences. Control seeks compliance. Boundaries assert standards. When you stop trying to control others, you stop outsourcing your stability. That is frightening at first, because you must face reality without negotiation, but it is also freeing. In the next segment, we will deepen this through another micro case study, an emotional release moment, and a guided visualization that allows you to feel what it means to loosen your grip. Because peace in relationships does not begin with changing them. It begins with releasing the illusion that you can. Let's examine micro case study number 10. I'll call him Kareem. Kareem struggled with his teenage son's independence. When his son made decisions Kareem disagreed with, frustration escalated, lectures increased, rules tightened, conversations became confrontational. Kareem justified his behavior as protection. I'm responsible for guiding him. But beneath that responsibility was fear. Fear of mistakes, fear of judgment, fear of losing influence. His attempts at control produced distance. His son withdrew. Conflict intensified. Through coaching, Kareem explored a difficult realization. He could guide, he could model, he could advise, but he could not control outcomes. His son's choices belonged to his son. When Kareem shifted from control to influence, tone changed. Instead of lectures, he asked questions. Instead of demands, he expressed values. Instead of reacting immediately, he paused. He replaced, "You can't do that," with, "Help me understand your thinking." Emotional tension reduced, not instantly, but gradually. And something unexpected occurred. Respect increased. Influence strengthened. Because control creates resistance, autonomy invites collaboration. Now, pause. Imagine someone in your life you attempt to manage, a partner, a parent, a colleague, a child. Notice where your mind tightens.
Notice where you rehearse arguments. Notice where you attempt to predict and adjust. Now visualize this. You are holding a rope. On the other end is that person. You are pulling, trying to guide their direction. The rope creates tension. Your hands strain. Your shoulders tighten. Now imagine loosening your grip. The rope slackens. They move as they choose. You remain standing, stable, breathing. You are not collapsing. You are not disappearing. You are standing without pulling. Feel the difference. This is emotional release. It is not indifference. It is grounded autonomy. Here is the emotional spike. When you stop trying to control others, you confront grief. Grief that you cannot guarantee behavior. Grief that love does not equal certainty. Grief that influence has limits. But beyond that grief lies relief. Relief that you no longer need to monitor every shift. Relief that your nervous system can rest. Expectation management reinforces this. Expect people to act according to their character, not your hope. Expect unpredictability as part of autonomy. Expect yourself to maintain standards. This is adult love. Adult love allows choice and chooses accordingly. You cannot control loyalty. You cannot control consistency. You cannot control maturity. You can control participation. You can control communication. You can control boundaries. And when those are clear, anxiety decreases because your stability no longer depends on someone else's fluctuation. As you move forward, you may notice something subtle. Less urgency to fix, less impulse to chase, less obsession with decoding, more observation, more clarity, more internal quiet. In the next chapter, we will explore the existential relief that emerges when control illusions dissolve not only in relationships, but in life itself. Because when you release control over others, you begin releasing control over outcomes. And that release does not weaken you, it steadies you. You are not becoming detached, you are becoming anchored.
Chapter 11. The Existential Relief of Letting Go.
There comes a point in psychological growth where techniques are no longer enough. Breathing helps, cognitive reframing helps, boundaries help, discipline helps. But beneath anxiety, beneath control, beneath ego, there is a deeper tension. The tension with impermanence. Everything changes. Relationships change. Bodies change. Careers change. Identity changes. And the mind resists this. It wants permanence. It wants guarantees. It wants certainty that what feels safe today will remain safe tomorrow. But impermanence is not a flaw in reality. It is the structure of reality. Much of anxiety is an argument with this structure. You want stability in a system designed for movement. You want certainty in a system built on probability. And the more you resist this, the more tension accumulates. Impermanence reframed becomes relief, not because loss is pleasant, but because resistance softens. When you accept that change is inevitable, you stop negotiating with it. You stop asking, how do I make this last forever? And begin asking, how do I participate fully while it is here? Mortality awareness sharpens this clarity. Most people avoid thinking about death. They see it as dark or destabilizing. But psychological research consistently shows that appropriate mortality awareness increases gratitude, value alignment, and perspective. When you remember that time is limited, trivial anxieties shrink, arguments lose intensity, perfectionism weakens, the urgency to prove yourself softens. Imagine this. If you knew with certainty that your time was finite, because it is, would you spend tonight replaying an awkward conversation from last week? Would you exhaust yourself trying to predict every future scenario? Or would you choose differently? Mortality awareness is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to focus you. It reminds you that control is illusion, but participation is choice.
Here is the retention spike. The mind fears uncertainty because it equates uncertainty with danger. But uncertainty is not danger. It is openness. The future has always been uncertain. You have simply survived it repeatedly. Think back 5 years. Many things you worried about never occurred. Many things that did occur were different than predicted. Yet you adapted. This pattern will continue. The fear of uncertainty exposure exercise is simple. Instead of avoiding unknown outcomes, imagine them calmly. Picture a scenario you fear: loss of approval, change of plan, unexpected outcome. Now ask, if this happened, what would I actually do? You will find that even in imagined difficulty, you possess adaptive capacity. The fear reduces when competence becomes visible. Let's examine micro case study number 11. I'll call her Nadia. Nadia experienced chronic anxiety about the future, health fears, financial fears, relationship fears. She described her mind as constantly preparing for collapse. Through structured reflection, she confronted a pivotal realization. She had survived every previous uncertainty, every exam, every transition, every breakup, every career shift. None of them unfolded exactly as predicted, but she adapted. We introduced mortality awareness journaling. Once a week, she wrote about how she wanted to spend limited time meaningfully, not productively, meaningfully. Gradually, her focus shifted from preventing every possible loss to valuing present engagement. Her words, "I don't need guarantees to live fully." That sentence marked identity consolidation. Impermanence stopped being threat. It became motivation. There is calm in accepting that you cannot freeze life. There is relief in admitting you cannot control endings. There is peace in recognizing that change does not erase meaning. It shapes it. In the next segment, we will consolidate this identity shift, ground it philosophically, and descend slowly into a steady understanding that letting go is not surrender to chaos. It is alignment with reality, and alignment reduces friction. When you stop arguing with impermanence, something subtle happens. Your grip softens, your breath deepens, your mental tempo slows. You no longer treat uncertainty as an emergency. You treat it as condition. This is calm, philosophical grounding. Stoic philosophy speaks of accepting what lies beyond control. Buddhist philosophy emphasizes non-attachment. Existential psychology recognizes that awareness of mortality intensifies authentic living. These traditions converge on one principle: resistance to reality produces suffering. Acceptance of reality produces clarity. Acceptance does not mean passivity. It means engagement without illusion. Identity shift consolidates here. Earlier in this journey, you were attempting to manage thoughts, then emotions, then others. Now you are releasing the final illusion that life must unfold according to your script. You are not powerless, but you are not omnipotent, and recognizing that difference stabilizes you. Consider how much mental energy is spent rehearsing futures, imagining conversations, predicting reactions, preventing hypothetical disasters. That energy rarely changes outcome, but it consistently drains presence. Letting go returns energy to now, not because the future disappears, but because obsession with controlling it decreases. Here is a slow reflection. Everything you have ever loved was temporary. Childhood, moments, seasons, conversations. Yet their impermanence does not erase their value. It amplifies it. If moments lasted forever, they would lose intensity. Impermanence creates urgency for presence. Presence creates depth. Depth creates meaning. Meaning reduces anxiety, because anxiety thrives in imagined futures. Meaning thrives in present engagement. Nadia's journey deepened months later when she faced a genuine health scare. Old anxiety patterns resurfaced briefly. But instead of spiraling, she paused. She asked, "What is within my control today?" Medical appointment, healthy routine, honest conversation. She focused on these. She did not attempt to control diagnosis. She did not attempt to control time. She accepted uncertainty. And in that acceptance, fear reduced. Not vanished, reduced. Calm does not eliminate fear. It contextualizes it. Fear becomes a signal, not ruler. Here is the emotional descent. Letting go feels like falling at first, but it is not falling. It is floating. You are no longer gripping every outcome. You are no longer bracing against every shift. You are allowing life to move while you remain grounded. There is relief in admitting, "I cannot guarantee outcomes." There is relief in saying, "I will participate fully anyway." There is relief in realizing, "I have survived uncertainty before." This is existential relief, not dramatic, not explosive, quiet, steady, grounded. The quiet mind at this stage is not silent because there are no thoughts. It is quiet because thoughts no longer demand absolute certainty. They arise, they pass, you act, you release, you engage, you accept, and something inside you loosens. Not ambition, not love, not responsibility, but rigidity. You stop trying to freeze time. You stop trying to eliminate risk entirely. You stop demanding permanence from a temporary world. In the next chapter, we will integrate everything: control, thought discipline, emotional regulation, action orientation, boundaries, impermanence. We will consolidate this into a stable identity of quiet strength, because letting go is not the end, it is the foundation. And from that foundation, a new way of living emerges, steady, intentional, free. Chapter 12. The Transformation, from Chaos
to quiet strength. At the beginning of this journey, your mind may have felt crowded, busy, reactive, tight. Perhaps you were trying to control outcomes, trying to decode people, trying to silence anxiety, trying to manage thoughts that would not slow down. You may have believed calm was something you either had or did not have. Now, something is different. Not because life has changed, but because you have. This transformation did not happen in a single realization. It unfolded in layers. First, you examined control. You learned the difference between what is within your command and what never was. You discovered that anxiety often feeds on outcome obsession. Then you separated identity from thought. You recognized that you are not the voice narrating worst-case scenarios. You stepped into the observer. Then you put your thoughts on trial. You questioned distortions. You challenged catastrophizing. You corrected probability errors. You reclaimed cognitive authority. You slowed your mind in a fast world. You shifted from urgency addiction to deliberate pacing. You regulated your nervous system instead of suppressing it. You examined ego patterns. You saw how being right, being validated, and being in control created friction. You released control over others. You embraced boundaries instead of manipulation. You accepted impermanence. You loosened your grip on certainty. Now, pause and contrast. Opening identity. I need to manage everything. If I don't think about it constantly, something will go wrong. I must prevent every negative outcome. Other people's reactions determine my peace.
I am my anxious thoughts. Now listen to the emerging identity. I focus on what I control. Thoughts are mental events, not commands. I act with discipline and release outcomes. I allow others autonomy and maintain boundaries. Impermanence gives meaning, not fear. This is not superficial change. It is structural. Let's reinforce the 5 core frameworks you have learned. Framework 1. Sphere of command. You clarified the difference between control, influence, and surrender. You redirected energy toward controllable effort. Framework 2. Mental courtroom method. You learned to question distorted thoughts systematically. You replaced emotional reasoning with evidence-based evaluation. Framework 3. Process over outcome discipline. You anchored identity to effort, not applause. You executed without internal commentary. Framework 4. Daily cognitive hygiene. You reduced mental clutter through structure. You practiced mental minimalism consistently. Framework 5. Existential acceptance. You stopped arguing with impermanence. You accepted uncertainty as condition, not catastrophe. These frameworks are not temporary tools. They are rewiring mechanisms. Neuroplasticity research shows that repeated thought patterns strengthen neural pathways. When you repeatedly redirect attention to controllable action, that pathway strengthens. When you repeatedly challenge catastrophic thinking, distortion weakens. When you consistently practice emotional labeling instead of suppression, regulation improves. Repetition rewires. Identity stabilizes around what is practiced daily.
Here is the emotional vulnerability spike. There may have been moments in your life where anxiety felt overwhelming. Moments where you felt behind. Moments where you questioned your capability. Moments where your mind did not feel like an ally. If that was you, know this. You were not broken. You were untrained. And training changes everything. This transformation is not about becoming emotionless. It is about becoming steady, not eliminating uncertainty, but standing within it. In the next segment, we will consolidate this identity fully. Envision your future self and anchor this transformation in long-term commitment. Because calm is not a temporary mood. It is a practiced identity.
Imagine yourself 1 year from now. Not a fantasy version, not perfect, but practiced. You wake up. Your mind does not immediately scan for threats. You define controllable actions. You breathe before reacting. You observe thoughts before believing them. You engage in relationships without gripping. You allow uncertainty without spiraling. Pressure still exists. Deadlines still exist. Human conflict still exists. But your internal response has changed. This is quiet strength. Quiet strength is not loud confidence. It does not demand attention. It does not perform calmness. It embodies it. And embodiment takes time. Long-term psychological rewiring depends on consistency, not intensity. Small daily repetition compounds. Each time you choose effort over outcome, you strengthen discipline. Each time you question a distortion, you strengthen cognitive clarity. Each time you release control over another person, you strengthen boundaries. Each time you accept uncertainty, you strengthen resilience. Months become identity. Identity becomes default. Default becomes character. Now let's speak directly. If you have followed this journey carefully, something inside you recognizes truth. Not dramatic truth, grounded truth. You do not need to control everything to feel safe. You do not need to silence every thought to feel calm. You do not need to fix everyone to feel worthy. You do not need guarantees to live fully. That recognition is strength. 5 minutes before the end of this chapter, pause. Notice your breathing. Notice the absence of urgency in this moment. Notice that you are here.
Listening, reflecting, choosing. That choice matters, and transformation deepens when shared. If this journey has shifted your thinking even slightly, commit to practicing these frameworks daily. Write quiet strength in the comments as a declaration of identity, not for performance, but for reinforcement. Subscribe if you want to continue building this discipline, because in the next audiobook, we will explore a deeper layer, how identity scripts formed in childhood continue shaping adult anxiety, how to rewrite them consciously, how to move from quiet strength to unshakable clarity. This is not the end, it is foundation. Stay with this work, revisit chapters, practice deliberately, share with someone who needs steadiness. Community reinforces identity, and you belong in a space where calm is cultivated intentionally. Here is the final reflection. Who are you becoming if you continue this discipline for 5 years? Not who you will impress, not what will you achieve, but who will you be internally? Steady, grounded, clear. That future self is not distant, it is built daily.
one redirected thought, one controlled action, one released expectation, one accepted uncertainty. Quiet strength is not accidental, it is constructed, and now you know how. If you are ready to continue this evolution, stay here. The next layer awaits.